Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you in today's webinar on Black Money Law by Vesh Associates Advocates. I extend my gratitude to all the participants for attending today in large numbers. I am Tejasvi Jain and I'll be moderating the session for today. So friends, as all of you are aware that the menace of black money is deep rooted in the Indian economy since over several decades, and it has remained the biggest challenge for the governments since independence. The government of India has left no stone unturned to weed out this evil and track down the unaccounted wealth stashed abroad, be it by bringing in several voluntary disclosure schemes, income declaration schemes, bearer bond schemes, or be it announcing demonetization of high currency notes and whatnot. But the biggest contribution to unravel corruption, I feel, was of the eminent jurist Mr. Ram Jethmalani, who was at the forefront of the famous black money case. In that case, the Supreme Court ordered formation of SITs for investigation regarding the unaccounted monies and wealth that was stashed abroad, and adverse remarks were made on the seriousness of then government for efforts for recovering the black money. So finally, the government of India brought out this legislation in the form of Black Money Act, which seeks to tax undisclosed income and assets earned and acquired outside India by the residents in India. And the efforts have eventually borne fruits. Recently, we've seen there's been a lot of action initiated under the Black Money Act, especially in view of the constant flow of information that's been coming to the notice of authorities through multiple data leaks, for instance, Panama Papers, HSBC Geneva leaks, etc. Even as per the newspaper reports, 422 notices have been issued under the Black Money Act as on 31st December 2019, involving around over 12,600 crores of undisclosed income and assets, and more than 340 prosecution cases have been filed. So friends, in today's webinar, Is Black the New White? We will delve upon the entire theme of black money law and discuss how the government is making efforts to bring black money back into the tax net, and therefore constitutionally turning black money into white. Um, we will also attempt to analyze various key aspects and nuances of the Black Money Act. So accordingly, we've divided our webinar into four parts. In the first part, we'll be dealing with the statutory provisions and the rules. In the second, we'll analyze the interplay between the Black Money Act and the Income Tax Act. Thirdly, we'll see what are the key takeaways from the very recent decision of the Mumbai bench of the tribunal in the case of Renu Tharani. And last but not the least, we'll be touching upon certain gray areas and the practical aspects, practical difficulties that are constantly faced by the assessees. Friends, during the course of the session, you may please continue sending in your questions via the chat box given below. We'll try and take up as many questions as possible at the end of the session. I would also request all the participants to please keep themselves on mute and stay tuned with us. So without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished panel of speakers. We have with us Mr. Ajay Vora, the senior advocate, Mr. Rohit Jain, Mr. Gaurav Jain, and Ms. Kavita Jha, partners, Vesh Associates Advocates. And so, starting with our first round of discussion, let us briefly understand from Mr. Gaurav Jain the theme of Black Money Act and some of the key provisions and rules. Over to you, Gaurav, sir.
Thank you, Tejasvi. I think the first agenda of the day is the theme of black money law. He has put the background in perspective. That is, the law was introduced to deal with the menace of black money. But I would say the genesis of the black money law was the manifesto by the BJP government when they were contesting elections in 2014, when they said that they would bring back 3 lakh crore of money stashed outside India into the coffers of the citizens of India. So I would say that is the genesis which led to the introduction of this black money law. While the act coins the word black money, friends, while the act coins the word black money, again, income tax on undisclosed foreign income or assets of the residents in India. So the scope of the black money law is only restricted to foreign undisclosed income or assets of the resident in India, but it is in the nature of income tax only. So I would say it is like a old wine in new bottle with an additional spark, and we'll see how. And with that, I'll proceed to certain finer aspects of the black money law. The act wants two words, that is undisclosed assets held outside India and undisclosed income earned outside India. What are these two? So the act basically seeks to tax these two items. Undisclosed foreign assets are foreign assets, the source of which remains unexplained by the assessee, and undisclosed foreign income which remains to be declared in the return of income filed under the Income Tax Act. So the black money law seeks to tax these two items, that is undisclosed foreign asset and undisclosed foreign income. And friends, we will see that both these items were hitherto even taxable under the Income Tax Act, because if you will recall, Income Tax Act also seeks to tax undisclosed assets in terms of section 69A of the Income Tax Act, and similarly the undisclosed income was also taxable. So this new law is bringing the tax on undisclosed income in a new format with the restricted scope of the undisclosed income of the foreigners. But there is a difference. The difference is that under the Income Tax Act, while assets are taxed at the rate at which they were acquired, so the cost of acquisition was deemed as undisclosed income under the Income Tax Act, but this law taxes the undisclosed assets at their value, at the value at which they come to the notice of the assessing officer. So in that sense, to the extent of taxation of undisclosed assets, it's a mix of partly Income Tax Act and partly mix of wealth tax. Wealth tax in the sense that this is taxing that asset value. So this is the brief background of how undisclosed assets and undisclosed income are being taxed. Section 3 of the Act is the charging provision, which brings this which brings these undisclosed assets to charge from the assessment year 2016-17 and onwards. So to that extent, the act is perspective. So therefore, the undisclosed income which was earned after AY 2016-17 and onward will only be taxable under the black money law. The undisclosed income for the earlier period will continue to remain taxable under the Income Tax Act. But there is a difference insofar as undisclosed assets is concerned. While Section 3 charges the undisclosed assets to tax from assessment year 2016-17 onward only, but there is a residuary provision at the end in Section 72C, which is couched under the head of removal of doubts, which provides that the undisclosed assets will be deemed to have been acquired in the year in which that undisclosed assets comes to the notice of the assessing officer. So in that sense, while Section 3 says that this act will be charged from assessment year 16-17, but by virtue of this deeming fiction, there is a retrospective effect of the law to the extent of undisclosed assets. So and we will in subsequent slides deal whether this law can be retrospectively applicable or not. But for the time being, this is the basic provision of the law. And before I go to further what are the rates of tax, I would like to, for the sake of completeness, I would also like to point out that when the law was originally introduced, Section 1 provided that this law will have effect from 1/4/2016. And simultaneously, the law also provided a one-time voluntary disclosure scheme for the assessees who wanted to disclose their assets, undisclosed assets or income between 30th September to 31st December of 2015. So in that sense, there was a dichotomy that on the one hand, the act was getting effected from 1/4/2016, whereas the law itself provided that prior to the act coming into effect, the assessees had an option to go for the one-time compliance window. So in order to remove that imbroglio, the CBDT issued by way a notification, issued a removal difficulties order and antedated the effect of the act from 1/4/2016 to 31/7/2015, mainly to enable the one-time compliance window to the assessees who wanted to disclose their assets earned up prior to AY 2016-17. And this is an important issue. I think my colleagues will subsequently discuss the impact and the authenticity of this notification. But for the sake of completeness, I thought I'll bring to this to attention of all. Now, the dealing with taxes applicable on undisclosed assets and income, the rate of tax prescribed on this undisclosed income and undisclosed assets is 30%. Tejasvi, can you move the slide? Penalty has been prescribed, state penalty is prescribed at 300% of the tax as per section 41. Apart from penalty, there is additional lump sum penalty of rupees 10 lakhs for not disclosing the assets in the return of income, assets or income in the return of income. That's an additional penalty of rupees 10 lakhs. Prosecution has been prescribed for a period of 8 to 10 years. And the offence under the Black Money Act is also described as a scheduled offence under PMLA. So these are the consequences under the Black Money Law. Apart from that, there are no immunity provisions under the law. So in case there is a prosecution, unlike Income Tax Act, there is no provision of compounding under the Black Money Law. There is no provision of going to a settlement commission if an assessee is found to be owner of undisclosed assets or income. So from the prosecution and punishment perspective, this law is more draconian than the Income Tax Act. And that's why I said it's an old wine in new bottle, but with an additional spark. To you, Tejasvi.
Thank you, sir, for the clear understanding and applicability of these basic provisions. So, with more and more information that's been constantly flowing concerning these undisclosed assets situated abroad, the assessing authorities have been actively assessing such undisclosed income. I think the next very important facet would be the procedure of assessment and the valuation of such undisclosed income and assets. So, I would now request Mr. Rohit Jain to explain us what is the procedure of assessment under the Black Money Act and the valuation rules. Rohit, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Tejasvi. So I think as Gaurav touched upon the fact that the valuation of the undisclosed asset is one of the important factor, because the provisions as vis-a-vis the Income Tax Act, because under the Income Tax Act, what could be taxed in your hands is only the amount of investment which you may have made while acquiring the asset. Whereas this is different in the Black Money Act, the provisions is altogether different. Under the valuation rules, there is a section. Firstly, there is a section 3(2), which says that the undisclosed assets shall be taxed at the fair market value, which is determined in the prescribed manner. And the manner in turn has been prescribed in Rule 3, which says that for an undisclosed asset outside India, they will take into account the cost of acquisition or the fair market value as on the valuation date. Now, valuation date has been defined to mean the first day of the relevant previous year. So, for example, if the asset is sought to be taxed in assessment year 2017-18, the value as on 1/4/2016 will be taken for the purpose of taxation. That is a very important factor which one needs to take into account. This is for the reason that even in a case where you may have acquired assets, say for example way back in 2000 or maybe in 1990, but it comes to the notice of the assessing officer say in 2017 or 2018, then in that situation it is not the value or the cost at which you may have acquired the asset way back in 1990 or 2000 is relevant. That is altogether irrelevant under the Black Money Act. You will be subjected to tax on the basis of the fair market value of that particular asset as and when it comes to the notice of the assessing officer. This is one important fact. The second important fact is with regard to the bank account. So supposedly there is a foreign bank account which has been found, and in that situation, all the credits which appear in the relevant bank account are taken into account, and you are given only set off of the amount which you may have withdrawn from the bank account, and the same amount is deposited in the bank account. Other than that, no credit is allowed to you. So it is like all the credits are taken together, and on all the credits you are subjected to tax at the rate of 30%. Another important aspect which is provided in the rules is that supposedly you sell the asset prior to it coming to the notice of the assessing officer, and then you sell the asset at less than the fair market value. In that situation, by virtue of the fiction itself, the fair market value of the asset will be adopted for the purpose of valuation. And that is precisely the reason why we have set out in the last slide that the effective rate of taxation is going to be very high. So in case you say, for example, an asset which costed you $1 lakh when you acquired the asset, but when it comes to the notice of the assessing officer, the value, say fair market value is $10 lakh, you will be subjected to tax at 30% on than $10 lakh, which is much more than, in fact, 3 times the cost of the asset per se. That aspect one needs to keep in mind, because that's a very important distinction between the Income Tax Act and the Black Money Act. Now, coming to the assessment procedure, now there is only one section, section 10 of the Black Money Act, which lays down the entire assessment procedure. This is different from the Income Tax Act in the sense that Income Tax Act has the regular assessment, then there is a scope for 147 reassessment, then there is a 153 assessments. But in Black Money Act, there is only one section, section 10, which says that the assessing officer can issue you notice on receipt of information from Income Tax Authority or any other authority, or if the information comes to his notice. Now these words, and then he has to make the assessment within 2 years. Now these words, information, is not at all defined. It is also not defined in the Black Money Act what kind of information can be considered by the assessing officer, whether it is going to be some tangible, reliable information, or he can proceed on any information which comes to his notice in the regular course. If you would recall and recollect that there is a similar word, information, which is there in section 132 in the context of the search and seizure provision, but there the word information is followed by information leading to reasons to believe, which is missing over here in the Black Money Act. So there is no such concept of a reasonable belief being built into the section 10. Another important aspect is there is no time limit which is given for the issuance of notice. This section is totally silent as to within how much time the assessing officer is required to issue notice, as and when information comes to his notice. Whether he is supposed to issue notice within 2 years, within 3 years, what would be the reasonable time is totally silent. Then there is no such requirement of recording of reasons as there in section 147 or 153A, which is the basis is the search. But there is no such reasons which is required to be recorded. There is no provision for sanctioning, and it's a totally kind of an unbridled or unfettered powers which are with the assessing officers. And what is important is the valuation. As I pointed out, the valuation is has to be taken with reference to the year in which it comes to the notice of the assessing officer. Now, how will the assessee come to know in which year the information came to the notice of the assessing officer, which is a very crucial factor for the purpose of valuation? I think this act is silent on all these aspects, and there is a larger constitutional and other issues which I think Tejasvi is going to raise to our other panelists with regard to the validity of this provision. Over to you, Tejasvi.
Thank you, Rohit sir. The assessment procedures and the issues arising were very well summarized. So without wasting further time, I now request Ms. Kavita Jha to guide on how would the court look at the assessment provisions. Kavita ma'am, how would the courts look at the assessment provisions, and can the provisions of section 10 be considered as arbitrary, considering that...
Yeah, Tejasvi, am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, and good morning to all the viewers. And I would request my friend was requesting everyone, please keep the mic on mute so that we are able to connect with all of you in a more proper way. Thank you so much for listening to us. I think you have raised a very pertinent question, Tejasvi. When you talk about section 10 per se, section 10 per se talks about assessment or reassessment procedure, and the assessing officer can actually, on receipt of information, this information can be from the income tax authority, could be from any other authority which is timing in force, of course, as per law, and any other information which comes to his notice. This information can be from any search proceedings which comes to his notice. So he's free to go ahead with the assessment proceedings. Now the question, a very important question which Rohit raised, what do you mean by information per se? So there is no definition, there is nothing which talks about information, and whether this information is credible, whether SSC can challenge this information, unlike section 147, 148, 153A, where assessing officer have to have reason to believe that reason to believe for going ahead with the assessments. Here in this case, the assessing officer has been given in a way I'll say it is unfettered. Although in many cases before the courts, they have been arguing that, it's unvouched, it's not verifiable. But so for this particular aspect, whether Section 10 per se is arbitrary, because if you really look into the scheme of the Act, Section 10, the power which has been given to the assessing officer, I'll say it is unbridled in that sense. Because unbridled, already explained, I'll just put, because there is no limitation which is provided. Assessing officer can issue notice at any point of time. Then, of course, there is a limitation provided for completion of the assessment. But for issuing notice, there is no time limit. And so, for assessing officer is concerned, he will not give you any reason to believe why such notice has been issued. So, any information which has been come, whether credible, not credible. Like, for example, in cases we are seeing most of the important informations which assessing officers are using are the Panama leaks and the Swiss leaks which they are using, and on the basis of those informations, they are going ahead with the assessments under Black Money Act. So these arguments definitely SSCs are taking before court that this is unverifiable, unvouched, not credible. But to my mind, if you really read the plain interpretation of Section 10, the assessing officer is not bound to give any reason.
So I think this is going to lead to extensive litigation in the times ahead, and it would be interesting to see how courts interpret the provisions of Section 10. I would now like to have benefit of Mr. Vohra's presence here for his expert comments on the entire scheme of the Act and what is his take on the same. For the one specific question that I would like to ask you, sir, do you think as per the scheme of the Act, taxing the undisclosed assets on FMV could lead to a situation where the amount taxed would be much more than the actual black money earned or invested in the assets by the taxpayer? Is this not too unreasonable and too onerous for the taxpayer? Further, can it be said that this is an aggregation of wealth tax and income tax act?
I think, thank you, Tejasvi, and good morning, friends. This law has evinced a lot of interest, as we can see from the number of registrations that have come in. But having said that, I must start by saying this is a draconian law. And the child crying at the time when we started this webinar was purely symptomatic. Nobody seems to like this law. Even the child knew that this is something which is extremely onerous. This is something which is draconian, which places unbridled powers in the hands of the revenue. My friend Gaurav said old wine in a new bottle with additional spark. I would want to twist it. I don't think it has a spark for the consumer or the drinker. It does not give the drinker a high. It gives an additional kick. So I think it does not have that spark, but it has that additional kick and that additional venom in the hands of the tax department. My friends have mentioned about no checks and balances in this act, and this is absolutely true. The assessing officer receives information, verified, unverified, proved, unproved, mere gossip, rumor, may seek to initiate proceedings under the Black Money Act. Now, therefore, there must be some semblance of safeguards provided in the statute to ensure that you don't have the assessing officers proceeding in an arbitrary manner without even a blemish of proved information or having some sanction by a superior authority before he proposes to take action. So I think in that respect, the law does not have the necessary safeguards, the necessary checks and balances to prevent abuse and misuse of the arbitrary power conferred on the revenue authorities. Then a question was raised that this law was made applicable for assessment years commencing from 1st April 2016. That is applicable from assessment year 16-17. And current income, that means income earned post or in that assessment year only can be subjected to tax under the Black Money Act if this income is otherwise undisclosed. Now, the Act has retroactive effect with respect to assets that were acquired prior to 1/4/2016 by making the value of the asset as the basis for levy of tax and the value of the asset as and when the assessing officer comes to know or receives information that you are possessed of an undisclosed foreign asset. So in that sense, it is seeking to move away from levying tax on the investment that you made in acquiring an undisclosed foreign asset, and that would be actually your income, by seeking now to levy tax on the value of the property that comes to the notice of the assessing officer at the time when he comes to be aware of the fact that you own an undisclosed foreign asset. You go back to the 1st of April of that relevant previous year, and the value on that date becomes the value of the undisclosed foreign assets. So clearly, this is not a tax on income. This has semblance of both income tax and wealth tax. You are seeking to tax your undisclosed income. Yes, that is a tax on income. But when you seek to tax the value of the undisclosed foreign asset, which may have been acquired some years ago for a different value, and if you seek to tax the accretion or the appreciation in value, you are not levying a tax on income. You are actually seeking to impose a wealth tax. So this act is both income tax and wealth tax rolled into one. Then a point was raised that whether this amendment that was made in terms of section 72C read with section 85, making this act applicable from 2015, July 2015. Now, I don't think it was done with the noble and novel intention of helping assessees seek to make declaration under the scheme that was announced between September to December 2015. Clearly, if you fail to make that disclosure, you were caught under the Black Money Act, which became applicable from 1/4/2016. So the point is whether this amendment, innocuous amendment, has the effect of giving retroactive operation to this law by making incomes earned prior to 1/4/2016 also, or prior to the previous year relevant to assessment year 2016 also being subject to the Black Money Act. I think that seems to me the larger intent behind me issuing that notification on 1/7/2015. That apart, if you ask this question whether the law has retroactive operation, yes, it does, because it seeks to tax the value of undisclosed foreign asset acquired prior to 1/4/2016 by seeking to levy tax on the value of the asset as and when the assessing officer discovers the same. So even though this asset is in your possession, acquired out of undisclosed sources, admittedly out of undisclosed sources in earlier years, the law, by seeking to tax the value of the undisclosed foreign asset, is in a way having a retroactive operation. And I think in order to avoid controversies on whether this act can have retroactive operation, whether it is retrospective, I think this phrase has been coined, value of undisclosed foreign asset, to shift the incidence of tax on the value of the asset as found, and not on the year of acquisition or on the amount of investment made in the undisclosed foreign asset. And lastly, these opening remarks, I would like to conclude by pointing out that, as Kavita said, there is no limitation provided in the law. The Damocles sword would continue to keep hanging. An asset acquired 30 years ago may still be subject to the black money law if the assessing officer, post receipt of information, seeks to invoke the provision of this draconian law in order to tax you on the value of the undisclosed foreign asset acquired 30 years ago. So clearly, by not providing this limitation, and I don't know whether the courts would want to read a reasonable limitation into these provisions. I am not sure that, given the spirit ethos of this act, whether courts would lean towards the side of the assessees who are found to have violated the law by not disclosing the income that was earned for taxation under the Income Tax Act, or any asset that they acquired out of undisclosed foreign income, out of undisclosed income, any undisclosed foreign asset out of undisclosed income. So frankly, I think it's an uphill task for the taxpayers, according to me, to challenge the provisions of Black Money Act. These are my opening remarks with regard to what has been discussed till now.
Thank you, Mr. Morak. Your expert comments were indeed very enlightening. So moving on to our next round of discussion, that is the interplay between the Income Tax Act and the Black Money Act. The generation of black money and its stashing away abroad in tax havens, it's predominated the discussions and debates in public fora. Everybody is anxious over the issue, especially since after the print media is abuzz with the publication of reports relating to vast estimates of unaccounted assets and money abroad. Now, if we minutely compare the Income Tax Act and the Black Money Act, we find that the two acts are intrinsically related to each other. Several definitions and provisions under the Black Money Act have derived reference from the Income Tax Act. So, while there are several similarities, it would seem that both the acts are overlapping. So, Gaurav sir, my next question is for you. Would you, for the benefit of our viewers, highlight that how can we reconcile the two acts? Which of the two acts is more specific? And can it be said that it's been left to the complete discretion of the assessing officer as to whether the proceeding shall commence in the Black Money Act or Income Tax Act? Over to you, Gaurav sir.
Yeah. Yeah, Tejasvi. So as I pointed out in my opening remarks, so this is again a direct tax, and certainly there is an overlap between the scope of income or assets which are taxed under the Black Money Law and Income Tax Act. So certainly there is an overlap, but Black Money Law is considered to be a specific law. In fact, when the Black Money law was introduced, the speech of the finance minister also said that since there are limitations in income tax law to tax such foreign incomes, this law is being introduced, which is to be considered as a more specific law. In fact, the word specific is coined in his speech. So in that sense, the Black Money law would be a more specific law than income tax law. But having said that, we don't have to go by the intent. One would need to interpret both the laws as per the language of both the statutes. And when we see language of both the statutes do not contain any overriding, or we call a non-obstante clause, in as much as neither the Income Tax Act says that Income Tax Act will override the provisions of law, or Income Tax Act is subject to Black Money law, and vice versa. So no such language is there in the Black Money law also. So from that perspective, from the language of both the statutes, there is an overlap. There is only one provision, that is section 4.3 in the Black Money law, which says that if an income, undisclosed income, is added under the Black Money law, then the same cannot be added under the Income Tax Act. So this is the only limited resolution that is provided in Black Money law, but this is also having a limited effect, because this says that when the income is first added under the Black Money law, it may not be added under the Income Tax Act. But the question is, which is the act in which the income is to be first added, whether Income Tax Act or Black Money law? So if it is added under Black Money law, certainly it is outside the ambit of Income Tax Act. But if it is added under the Income Tax Act, whether you can go to Black Money or law, that is an open question. But to my mind, considering that there is no obstante clause, there is no overriding provision, I would say there is certainly an option with the department, and that option would be governed by where the assessing officer is moving first. Where is he first getting the jurisdiction to tax such income? So, for instance, if it's a case of a search and an information is found on the basis of search, then the assessing officer gets the jurisdiction under section 153A of the Income Tax Act, and therefore when he issues 153A notice, it is the Income Tax Act in which he will complete the assessment. Now, having commencing the income tax proceedings under 153A, then he cannot stop those proceedings and tax it under the Black Money law, because there are series of cases under the Income Tax Act where it says when the proceedings have been initiated and they remain inchoate, no further proceedings can be initiated under different provision. So drawing analogy from that, if the proceedings are first initiated under the Income Tax Act, the assessing officer will need to complete those proceedings first, and then he will have to assess it under that law. So if it is Income Tax Act, he will have to complete the assessment in Income Tax Act and will have to rule out Black Money law, or vice versa. So if he gets the jurisdiction to assess under the Black Money law, then only he will not touch the income tax law. So in that sense, there is an option, or I would say where he gets the jurisdiction to make the assessment. If he exercises the option under the income tax law, or he gets the jurisdiction by way of initiating proceedings under 153A or under 147, then he will have to, in my opinion, complete the assessment under income tax law and put aside the other law. So these are my views on this. Maybe my other panelists can supplement the view on this interplay.
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav. I just supplement what Gaurav said as of now. Is he's absolutely right when he says that there is no provision. The while the intent of the government may be to make the provisions of the Black Money Act a more specific and the more prime act for the purpose of taxation of undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign assets. But there is no provision as such which has been given in the act, either in the Income Tax Act or under the Black Money Act, which might make the provisions of either of the two acts more specific vis-a-vis the other. In fact, as he rightly pointed out, the only section is section 4.3, which says that if the income has already been subjected to tax, then the same income cannot be subjected to tax in the other act. So that is only kind of a giving of a credit mechanism where the income has already been taxed in a particular act, it cannot be taxed in the other act. The another provision is when we talk of computation provision in the scope of total income, undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign asset. Section 5 also talks of giving of the credit. So for example, the what section 5 says is, if I acquired the asset of say at 10 lakh dollars, whereas I disclosed in my tax returns the as the asset having acquired at say 4 lakh dollars, and subsequently the assessing officer comes to know that the actual value of that asset was actually when it was acquired was 10 lakh dollars. In that situation also the differential can be subjected to tax under the Black Money Act, and a proportionate credit will be allowed with reference to the fair market value of the amount which you have already disclosed, which is that 4 lakhs dollars. So there is a credit mechanism which is there, but there is no non-abstentive provision which is there in either of the two acts, which might make one of the two acts specific act or the prime act. But we also must keep in mind the fundamental provisions is that of the Income Tax Act, because the income tax return has to be first filed under the Income Tax Act. You have to disclose your assets under the Income Tax Act, and only when you don't disclose the income or an asset for the purpose of the Income Tax Act, it acquires the characteristic of an undisclosed income or an undisclosed asset. So first main act continues to be the Income Tax Act. When it acquires the character of an undisclosed income or an undisclosed asset, then there is an overlap between the two provisions of the Black Money Act and the Income Tax Act. And where again, as Gaurav rightly said, that there is no clarity. There is one, it may be left to the discretion of the assessing officer as to which provision he seeks to invoke. And what we have seen practically as a tendency from the tax department also has been that they want to somehow bring the undisclosed asset and the undisclosed income under the Black Money Act. And the reason is obvious, that because the income, the rate of taxation may be same under the Black Money Act, but there are many much wider powers which are given under the Black Money Act. And that is precisely the reason why there is this issue of interplay between the two acts has acquired more importance. Over to you, Tejasvi.
Right. So, Kavita ma'am, in fact, I am also practically handling a case. Just a second. Ma'am, as highlighted by Gaurav sir earlier, what is your take on the interplay between the Income Tax Act and the Black Money Act? Ma'am, I request you to unmute yourself.
I think Tejasvi, before Kavita deals with the issue of how the courts are going to look into it, I think we left out two aspects which are there in the earlier two slides, which is supposingly an asset is found, as Gaurav also raised one point, as to once there is a search which is conducted, then the primary section which under which the provisions, the assessment is reopened is section 153A. And in that situation, whether the income or an asset is to be subjected to tax under the provisions of the Income Tax Act or the provisions of the Black Money would apply. In fact, a very interesting issue over here would arise. Supposingly, take an example where the search is initiated for the with the satisfaction note that there is some undisclosed foreign asset or an income which has escaped, and therefore a search is taken place. In that case, the primary reason of the search itself is to find out the undisclosed income or an undisclosed asset. Now, in that situation, the issue would arise whether the assessing officer is bound to assess that income which is found during the course of search as part of the assessment under section 153A, or he will have to assess he can close that assessment under section 153A and move to the Black Money Act. These are again an open question. And another practical issue which we are facing and which we have been noticing of late has been that there is a tendency on the part of the department to first close the assessment. In fact, without closing the regular assessment, also making a concurrent assessment under the Black Money Act. And there have also been instances where the same income has been taxed on a protective basis under the Income Tax Act, and the same income is subjected to tax on a substantive basis under the Black Money Act. And these again are going to raise a lot of issues, which I think Kavita is going to deal with when these matters are going to before the courts. That whether a substantive or a protective assessments can be made under two acts, because you are making a protective assessment under the Income Tax Act, whereas a substantive assessment is being made under the Black Money Act, and the basis of assessment itself is altogether different. Because under the Income Tax Act, what can be taxed is the cost of acquisition, whereas under the Black Money Act, what has to be taxed is the fair market value of the assets. And then the basis of the satisfaction. Also, there are so many issues which are going to arise as to with regard to the interplay between the two provisions. And one more issue which I just want to quickly highlight is with regard to whether part of the income can be taxed here and part of the income can be taxed under the Black Money Act. So I'll just give us quickly a simple example. Say foreign asset, foreign immovable properties found to be have been acquired by the assessee way back in 2000, and the assessee has been receiving a rental income out of that property over the years. Now, as Gaurav also pointed out in his initial remarks, that under the Black Money Act, you can only tax the undisclosed foreign income of the relevant assessment year. So, under the Black Money Act, the assessing officer can only tax the rental income from assessment year 2016-17 onwards. Now, to tax the rental income for the earlier assessment years, the assessing officer will have to perforce initiate the proceedings under the Income Tax Act. So, this larger issue again would arise. Whether is it possible for an assessing officer to tax part of the income out of the very same undisclosed foreign asset under the Black Money Act and part of it under the Income Tax Act? And I think Kavita will request Kavita to deal with this issue. How are courts going to look into these provisions of interplay, the discretion being conferred? There is no clarity in law as to which provision is more specific, and how to decide all those things. I think I'll give it to Kavita now.
Thank you, Rohit. I think, this is a very interesting issue, and in times to come, there will be a lot of litigation. Black Money Act per se is a new legislation, so there are a lot of litigations you are going to see in court. But as of now, there are some judgments which are there in public domain. So there is one Gujarat High Court judgment which is top of the town, because the judgment. I'm not talking about the judgment per se. I just talk about the interplay and the stand of the revenue. The stand of the revenue in that particular case was, so for Income Tax Act and Black Money is concerned, they are not mutually exclusive. So if, in fact, the SS department has, and they can simultaneously proceed under the Income Tax Act also, and also under the Black Money Act. So that was the stand. So that was the stand of the department. And again, in cases like we have seen judgments from Calcutta High Court, from Allahabad High Court, from Bombay High Court, wherein the SSEs have challenged the proceedings against the Black Money Act. But the High Court has specifically dealt with those issues and said, and they have allowed that Black Money proceedings to go on, irrespective of notices issued under Income Tax Act. There's one judgment which I wanted to talk about, which says that how proceedings under Income Tax Act and Black Money Act can go hand in hand. There's one judgment which came from Allahabad High Court in the case of Raghav Beher. In that judgment, what happened was there was a sanction which was issued under Section 5051 for prosecution. And simultaneously for the same assessment year 1819, if I am not wrong, 276 notice was also issued under Section Income Tax Act. So the SSE went before Allahabad High Court challenging this complaints and also challenging the Black Money proceedings. So the Allahabad High Court has gone into the entire object of the Black Money Act, and then they said that they have dismissed the petition, but ultimately they said both income tax notices under 276 and Black Money proceedings under Section 5051 can go ahead. So both these provisions are basically criminal complaints, and it leads to ultimately prosecution and imprisonment. So what I was trying to say that so far the interplay is concerned, in this matter, we specifically saw that High Court have allowed for same assessment here, the criminal and also the penalty provisions to go hand in hand. Of course, this judgment is pending before Supreme Court and the matter is sub judice, but that's how the department are taking stand. So I would say that yes, the only rider which is there, which my friends were explaining earlier, section says if you have been taxed under one act, then of course you will get necessary credit under the other act. But so far as proceedings are concerned, proceedings will go hand in hand. And actually, there are no embargo on the department to not to proceed with one act or the other act.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Vora, considering that prior to enactment of black money law, the government had also amended the Income Tax Act to tax the undisclosed income and assets. So how do you think would the two acts go hand in hand without any interjection, and how do you think would the courts interpret the same?
I think there are many unanswered questions that arise from this interplay, and possibly I don't have a clear opinion or a clear guidance. Rohit mentioned about the fact that under the Black Money Act, there are provisions to say that if you are being assessed under the Income Tax Act, you get credit for the income assessed there and you get probably credit for the tax paid. In a converse situation, if you are assessed under the Black Money Act, and that's my question to my fellow panelists, if you are assessed under the Black Money Act, then do you get credit under the Income Tax Act? There is fortunately or unfortunately no provision, but does it seem to suggest that the Black Money Act has to be given primacy? So again, I have no answers, but from what it seems is it is left to the ipsy-dixie of the assessing officer, and the assessing officers in practice always hold out the threat of proceeding against the taxpayer against the Black Money Act first. So I think again this is example of how this act has been enacted, how this act has been framed. It leaves many issues open. It is going to open a Pandora's box of litigation, and which will eventually land at the doors of the court. Now, Rohit gave an example that you have a search based on information that you have undisclosed foreign asset, and you find that in the search. But you also find that I am maintaining a diary where I record domestic transactions which are not disclosed. Now, clearly under the Black Money Act, you can't tax undisclosed domestic income. So are we suggesting that there must be two simultaneous proceedings going on against the taxpayer, one under the Black Money Act to bring to tax the undisclosed foreign asset, and also under the Income Tax Act under section 153A, because that gives automatic jurisdiction to the assessing officer the moment there is a search. He reopens cases of the last 6 years, plus he has power to reopen another 4 years. So do proceedings simultaneously go on against the taxpayer under both the laws? If you ask me, one can say that under the Income Tax Act, he has a right to tax both. He can bring to tax the undisclosed domestic income as also attack the undisclosed foreign income. So why have two proceedings? But I think these are open questions that arise, and one clearly does not have an answer to these kind of situations, which have clearly not been contemplated by the legislature while enacting this law. Now, under the Income Tax Act, you have a provision that where a search is made, pending assessments abate. But it also says that if the search assessment is quashed for one reason, that assessment will revive. That assessment which was abated will revive, and so on. Now, what happens in a situation like this? Suppose you make an assessment under the Black Money Act, and that assessment for some reason is quashed. Now, in that situation, can you say the 153A proceedings, which have become time barred by then, automatically revive? Now, clearly, this act does not give the answer. It will be left to our individual ingenuity and the court's ultimate decision of how the assessments would go on in this kind of a situation. Kavita made a very dangerous remark about the Allahabad High Court judgment, and she said that conviction can go on simultaneously under both the laws. So are you suggesting that I serve 3 years under the Income Tax Act and maybe 10 years under the Black Money Act, so it can go up to a total of 13 years?
So these are clearly the answers. Matter is sub judice before Supreme Court, so that's how the courts are interpreting. So it's dangerous.
I think Kavita will give a clear answer only when she gets a feast, but at the moment it seems you will suffer conviction for 13 years. So I think what one can possibly see is that the revenue department is overzealous in invoking the Black Money Act. And frankly, as I said, the courts are leaning more towards the side of the revenue because they feel that black money has been a malice plaguing the society for long. I don't see a very sympathetic attitude from the courts coming in. But in a situation like this, where you talk of personal liberties, I would think the court should be reasonable and say that we will uphold the higher sentence under the Black Money Act. That's my take on it. But clearly, no answers that can be spelled out in black and white with regard to these myriad situations that will arise in actual practice. So there is confusion galore, and I think this will continue till the courts settle the dust on these kind of controversies that arise on a day-to-day basis. Thank you, Tejasvi.
Very valid points made, sir. Thank you. So, friends, now coming to the most important part of our webinar, the decision of the Mumbai bench of the tribunal in case of Renu Tikamdas Tharani, which made a lot of headlines recently. In fact, the whole idea of this webinar kicked in just after this decision only. So, the tribunal in the said decision has held octogenarian Renu Tharani liable to pay tax on over rupees 196 crores that was stashed in Swiss banks in the name of Tharani Family Trust, of which assessee was a discretionary beneficiary. So I would now request Gaurav sir to explain the facts of judgment in detail and the core issues that are arising out of the judgment and how the tribunal has dealt with the same.
Yes, Tejasvi, thank you. Friends, as Tejasvi has pointed out, certainly this is a very important decision. It has laid down several important aspects, more particularly relating to what is the test of owners, in what kind of evidences can a foreign income be taxed or not. It's an income tax matter, but considering we are dealing with the issue of black money today, this decision would apply with equal force in black money matters also, and we will deal with it subsequently. But first, the facts. What were the facts of the case? Now, the assessee in this case was a 70-year-old lady who had filed return for the relevant assessment year in India at a nominal income of rupees about 1,70,000. Now, subsequently, on the basis of some leaked information on the HSBC bank accounts at Geneva, department get possessed of a base note. Base note was basically not a bank account but an information which contained the details of the bank account held in Geneva. In that base note, the holder of the bank account was named as a Cyprus company. Cyprus company and the beneficial holder of the account was named as the assessee individual, and there was a linked person which was named as a family trust. On that basis, the department formed the view that since the assessee is named as the beneficial owner of the money lying in the bank account is the assessee, and therefore the income has escaped assessment, and issued 148 notice. Now, when this was put to the assessee was clueless. Assessee showed its ignorance and said that no, I do not own the bank account. And when the further facts were found, the facts that emerged were that the bank account was in the name, as I pointed out, in the Cyprus company. The Cyprus company was called an underlying company of the family trust. Underlying company of the family trust means that the shareholders of the underlying company was the family trust, and assessee was the discretionary beneficiary of that family trust. So discretionary beneficiary would mean that beneficiary would get the money only at the discretion of the trustee, and not before that. And there is a Supreme Court decision in the case of H.H. Vikram Gonde, which says that the beneficiary gets right in the discretionary trust only when the income is distributed. So on that basis, the assessee said that I am only a discretionary trust. I have never opened the account. You cannot ask me to prove the negative, that I am not the owner of that money, and therefore the assessee was not able to bring any document on record. The assessing officer also asked the assessee to sign the consent form so that they can get the further details of the bank account from Geneva. The assessee did not sign that consent form. The assessee did not sign that consent form on the reason that since that bank account was not opened by me, I am not the owner of that bank account. I do not have any locus to sign the consent form to give the bank statement. So on that basis, there was no evidence brought on record by the assessee, mainly on the plea that I cannot be asked to prove the negative that I am not the owner of the bank account. If I was found the owner, then you could have asked me whether or not that money in that bank account belonged to me or not. But since I'm not the owner, the revenue cannot ask me to prove the negative. So in that situation, there was a stalemate between the assessee and the department. Stalemate in the sense there was no evidence other than the base note, which said that the assessee is the beneficial owner, but further facts found that he was a discretionary beneficiary of the bank account through the Cyprus company and through the family trust. Now the matter reached before the tribunal. Tribunal has resolved this stalemate by saying that you cannot, in such a situation, the department also cannot be asked to discharge the burden when the assessee is not cooperating in as much as neither the assessee has signed the consent form, nor is there any trust deed available on record which says that who is the settler, whether or not the assessee is the discretionary trustee or not. There is no evidence at all on record. So in that situation, we cannot apply the strict principles of evidence, and the decision can be taken on the basis of circumstantial evidence, test of probability. And what test they applied? They did a Google research by saying that first they draw adverse inference from the fact that the company that is incorporated was a Cyprus company, and Cyprus is famous to be a tax haven where the companies are incorporated to park the wealth of the individuals, where there is no name given of the owners, and Cyprus is in that sense infamous for parking the stashed wealth. That's the first adverse inference they drew. The second, they went on to the HSBC Geneva. They went to the website of HSBC Bank, where the HSBC publicized on its website that we can act as trustees of the trust. Kindly come to our bank account, park your money, create a trust, settle the funds in those trusts, and you will only become the beneficiary, and we will act as trustee of those funds. So on the basis of that publication on the website, the tribunal again drew adverse inference that there's something fishy, everything fishy about this transaction, and you are not Mother Teresa who that you will not know who has given me 200 crores and I am only the discretionary beneficiary, and somebody has given so much of money that you will get after the dissolution of the trust. So on that basis, the tribunal disregarded the theory of onus on the assessing officer and the theory that there is no evidence on record to tax this money in the hands of assessee, and on the basis of that they applied the test of probability to uphold the addition of that income in the hands of the assessee. So therefore, this decision, friends, you will see lays down very important issues as to what is the test. Even in case of black money, if the information is found that you are the discretionary beneficiary of a trust of a money held outside India, whether automatically will you be asked to prove the source of that money and to prove whether that money belongs to you or not? What is the sanctity of not signing the consent form? Whether in every case where you deny to sign the consent form, that will be held against you. And then the third part, whether in case of a discretionary trust, the Supreme Court has laid down that in the case of a discretionary trust, income will be taxed only when that income is distributed. So whether after this decision, in every situation, in case the assessee is the beneficiary of a discretionary trust, that income will be taxed in its hand. So whether it's a general law laid down by this tribunal, or is it something peculiar to its facts, where there was a case of a Cyprus company, account in HSBC Geneva, and the assessee was not cooperating, there was no fact on record, whether in those circumstances these questions will be answered against the assessee. So these are the issues. Now I will forward it to my fellow panelists to take this forward.
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav. I think you have set the background very well. And this judgment, in fact, is one of the very important and talked about judgments, particularly in the context of the foreign assets being found, and more particularly in the context of SHBC Geneva. Now, what is it? As you rightly said, this judgment is actually on the peculiar facts of this case itself. And I think the tribunal was also very conscious while giving this judgment, that this judgment should not be seen as if it lays down a general proposition of law. And that is precisely the reason that the judgment in the para 49 of the judgment, before concluding, the honorable members have specifically mentioned that the judgment is set out in the background facts of this case. And what are the important key takeaways from this judgment is what we need to understand. And that will only give us the ratio of the judgment. The key facts over here was the assessee accepted that yes, she is a discretionary beneficiary of the trust. That's a very important fact. The second very important fact was the copy of the trust deed was never filed before the tribunal, and that is one of the observations mentioned in the tribunal judgment, that though a draft trust deed was somewhere filed and there is a mention of the draft trust deed being placed on record, but the copy of the trust deed was not filed. So once the copy of the trust deed itself was not filed, it was not clear who formed the trust. From the affidavit and from the statement which were made before the tax authorities was that the trust was created by a Cayman Island company. Now that Cayman Island company, the assessee only said that I am neither the shareholder nor the director of that company, and no further information was given. So who are the shareholders of this company, who are the directors of the company, again was not known. So the fundamental or the basic information with regard to all this trust and the money was not even given by the assessee. So it was not known who was the settler, it was not known she was the beneficiary, but it was not known who are the directors and the shareholders of the Cayman Island company. And in this background, the tribunal, they started looking into the facts of this case, and they said, in order to first set the background or the agenda, they first referred to the entire history as to how the base note came into the possession of the tax authorities. Then they referred to the fact that there was a stolen information. The French government passed on that information to the Indian tax authorities. And that is how the Indian tax authorities came into possession of that base note. Then it was also has been noticed by the tribunal in its judgment, and which is very important, is that immediately after when the investigation started, the trust was wound up. It has also been noticed by the tribunal that immediately after the investigation started, even the company was wound up. It was struck off from the registers, and there was no clue as to where the money went, because it was an undisputed fact that there was a huge money in this trust, of which the assessee was a discretionary beneficiary. But where the money went, it was not known. In this background, when the tribunal took note of the fact, when the assessee was asked to give a consent waiver form, she was not even forthcoming in giving the consent waiver form. And in these circumstances, the tribunal held that the only option which is available is to assume or presume that this was your money. And then for that purpose, they refer to the HSBC Bank Services, where they are claiming that you come up with your own money and we will create a trust, provide all kinds of services, and give you even the nominee directors and shareholders. And therefore, the tribunal held that in these circumstances, the assessee cannot be claiming the benefit of the general law or the principle that it is the onus is always on the person who alleges as to whose money is this. And in that background, they said that we have to take into account the preponderance of probabilities. We can't put the blinkers on we can't have blinkers. We can't shut our eyes to these glaring facts. And ultimately, they confirm this addition. What is also important to note is this is in the context of a foreign asset or a foreign income. The information which is available with the income tax department can only be obtained from the foreign governments or from the foreign sources. And it is also always difficult to get this information. So this judgment has to be seen in the background of all these cumulative facts. And that is why precisely in para 49, the tribunal says that even they have clarified that even in a case where a base note is found, you cannot hold that by virtue of this judgment, the addition has to be perforce made. So that is what the tribunal has clarified. One more aspect which I just want to quickly deal with is with regard to the consent waiver form. To that extent, we may not fully agree with the tribunal judgment, because tribunal in his judgment has held that the consent waiver form, assessee could have filed the consent waiver form, because by filing a consent waiver form, the assessee only gives up her immunity that she of the confidentiality which is available with regard to the foreign bank accounts. But if we see the consent waiver form, the contents of the consent waiver form, there is actually a declaration that I am either the beneficial owner or the signatory or the ultimate beneficiary of that bank account. So once I sign that consent waiver form, actually I am signing in my capacity as either of those three persons. So to that extent, I think that opens up a larger issue as to what extent the assessee can be can be asked to sign a consent waiver form. And I think in this context, it is also important to note usually what is happening is in many cases the department is actually initiating the prosecution proceedings prior to actually starting with the assessment proceedings. So it is more becoming like a criminal proceedings than a civil proceedings. And in that background, I think the Mr. Vora and Kavita will be the right persons to explain to us as to what extent the onus can be put on the assessee, and he can be forced to file a consent waiver form. I think you are going to raise these issues to the two lawyers over here. So over to you, Tejasvi.
Right, sir. I think it was very well explained. I think this landmark decision may act as a jackpot for the government exchequer. In fact, it's been in the newspaper that post this ruling, the CBDT and PMO have been actively following up on the status of action against Indian nationals named in the leaked documents from HSBC reports by ICIJ. So, coming to you, Kavita, ma'am, how do you view this from the perspective of Article 20, subclause 3 of the Constitution and presumption under the Indian Evidence Act?
Thank you. See, basically, so nature of Black Money Act is both taxing as well as penal statute. Right? So the act intends to tax as well as punish the offenders. So therefore, assessment proceedings and the prosecution proceedings both can go simultaneously. This is very clear. You see Section 48, Clause 2 of the Black Money Act. 48, Clause 2 of the Black Money Act notifies that the chapter on offences and prosecution shall be independent. It's not in derogation to any other sections of the Act. So in that sense, it will go, both the proceedings can go on simultaneously. But now, since Black Money Act also has penal consequences, so it has to muster the support of various principles which are there for criminal proceedings. Now, for example, Article 23. When you're talking about specifically Article 23, it says that it's basically a self-incrimination in criminal law is unconstitutional. So no person can be called upon to actually say something or give any evidence which is against it. That is Article 23. So when you're talking about presumption, so yes, if we test the requirement of consent waiver in the light of Article 23, so what we can say is once you are signing a consent waiver form in the Income Tax Act, the revenue presumes that you are guilty of an offence. But when you are signing a consent waiver form under Article 23 Black Money Act, so it is like an article, you are hit by Article 23. You are asking for an evidence against your own self, which is unconstitutional, and you cannot do this under Article 23. So, but whereas, however, we have looked into some judgments which are there. So, in those judgments, till now, under Black Money Act, no consent waiver form has been called upon to be signed by the SEC. So, in that limited, I'll say in public domain, there is no consent form which has been asked by the revenue authorities to the SSCs to sign. So presumption, you per se, you cannot say that yes, SSC is bound to sign the consent waiver form. Yes, but looking at the circumstances and 114 of Evidence Act, the presumption would go against you. That under Income Tax Act, I said that yes, if you are not signing the consent waiver form, looking at the surrounding circumstances, there is something which you are hiding. In those circumstances, court and revenue would take a view which is against you.
Right, ma'am. Mr. Vora,
would you talk about the burden of proof also? If you really ask me about burden of proof, then how do you explain burden of proof under Black Money Act? I'll say there are two categories. One is on the criminal side, which is Section 54, which talks about culpable mental state. And they presume that, yes, you are guilty of not disclosing foreign income or foreign assets, which you were supposed to disclose in the returns. And then there is one aspect which talks about Section 10. See, when we have noticed, when we examine Section 10 per se talks about that any information which comes to the notice of the assessing officer can actually tax or undisclosed foreign assets which has come to the notice of the assessing officer. So in that context, the burden would be that information which the assessing officer has in possession, whether it is credible, not credible, you are bound to produce those books of accounts, evidences, documents which has been called for. And you will have to prove that, yes, these documents, these evidences are incorrect to that extent. So unlike Income Tax Act, when we say it's a rebuttable presumption, the bonus keeps on shifting. So for Black Money Act is concerned, when you read Section 10 and the assessment proceedings together, the conclusion could be that, yes, it will be difficult to come to a conclusion that presumption, the onus will be solely and solely on the revenue.
So, Mr. Vora, has the decision of Mumbai bench contradicted the judgment of Supreme Court in the case of Maharaja Vikram Singh Ji? What are your views on the same?
I think before I answer your specific query, I would preface my comments by saying that bad facts make bad law. Now, basically, if you look at the facts of this case, which Gaurav and Rohit have alluded to in great detail, what ultimately came out was that the attempt of the revenue to get information is stonewalled at every stage. The assessee did not produce the copy of the trust deed. The assessee did not sign the consent waiver form. The bank account was closed. The Cayman Island company was struck off the register of members. Now, faced with that situation, the tribunal has taken aid of Section 114 of the Indian Evidence Act to say that where evidence is not forthcoming and the government cannot possibly reach that evidence for want of being able to get through the privacy laws in Geneva or with HSBC. So, in that view of the matter, an adverse inference has been drawn against the assessee, and that is based on the cumulative facts that case which Rohit emphasized. Now, if you look at these kind of cases that keep coming now with respect to undisclosed foreign bank accounts, I think the courts are leaning more towards the point that the revenue can do as much and no more. So if the revenue cannot possibly reach the ultimate source of that information, so you would seek to rely on a photocopy of a document, you would seek to rely on stolen information. That normal concept of burden of proof is given a go by. And to your point about the distribution of income and the principle laid down by the Supreme Court in the case of HIGG Vikramjit of Gonda, that again has not been made applicable to the present facts. Now, in the present facts, if you look at the situation, what has the tribunal presumed? The tribunal has presumed that the lady was described as discretionary, and it has come on record saying that she is the discretionary sole beneficiary of the trust. Now, the trust deed is not produced. Now, therefore, the existence of the trust is doubted. So, first, the tribunal said that if there is no existence of the trust and she is the sole discretionary beneficiary, then the money is actually hers. And therefore, a distribution is not necessary. She has deposited the money and acting as the settlor of the self-created trust. And they therefore refer to the website of the HSB Bank of how they set up these trust structures. So therefore, that's the first presumption, that she herself was the settler and the monies in the account really belonged to her. That was her undisclosed income, which was subjected to tax. That was the first. The second was, assuming the trust does exist, the trust was operated by JWU Investments, which was a Cayman Island company, of which again the assessee is described as the beneficial owner. Even though she may not have been the registered shareholder, she is not a director. But again, it is held that she is the beneficial owner of that company. So even if there exists a trust structure, the trust is owned by the company of which she is the beneficial owner. So once again, it comes back to the fact that it is her own money that has been laundered through the form of this trust structure and by setting up this intermediate company in the Cayman Islands. The assessee also claimed at some stage that she was a non-resident and she was a permanent resident of USA since 1993. The tribunal observed that before the deposit of money was made, it was, I think, less than a year, and she could not have possibly earned 200 crores out of foreign source income to say that this was exempt from tax. So therefore, having regard to these cumulative facts, now I ask a question to myself, that assume a trust deed had been produced and there was a genuine trust in existence. The revenue or the tribunal could have reached the settlor, questioned the settlor to say that you created this trust for, and you named Mrs. Tharani as the sole beneficiary of the trust. Now, in this situation, can you explain the sources of income out of which you've deposited or settled this trust? So, in that situation, yes, if there was a trustee, there was a settler, one could possibly have said that the burden shifted to the revenue to, make necessary inquiries with the settlor, and that the principle laid down by the Supreme Court with regard to taxing the discretionary beneficiary only on distribution would apply. But as I said, given the facts of this case, I think the facts are gross. And that's why we've had such an adverse decision from the tribunal. But as rightly pointed out, and I think that's the saving grace, this cannot be treated as a precedent that will be applied universally across all situations. But clearly, with regard to principles, the revenue would say that if the taxpayer is stonewalling all attempts to make further investigation to get information, I think an adverse presumption should be drawn against the assessee, and the income should be, or the deposits in the bank should be taken to be the undisclosed income of the assessee. I think this certainly clears the pitch so far as further cases are concerned. The revenue will time and again rely on this judgment to support any addition made for undisclosed foreign bank accounts.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, moving on to some of the practical issues and certain gray areas, I would like to ask Kavita ma'am that would it not be correct to state that the Act seeks to have a retrospective or retroactive applicability? And if yes, would it pass the test before the courts, especially in light of Gautam Khaitan's case?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tejas. I think Gaurav, at the very beginning, had started and in fact explained that so far the Black Money Act was concerned, it was enacted and it was supposed to come into effect from 1st April 2016. But there was one-time disclosure window which was there available in the Black Money Act, that is Section 59, which said that the SSEs who have undisclosed foreign income and assets, they could come clean and they could disclose that income. But the time which was there provided was July 2015, by which you were supposed to make a declaration, and by December you were supposed to pay the tax. The problem, the government could see the problem, so that's how under 85, under the hours which they had under Section 85, so they brought a notification by which they changed the date of the Act coming into effect from 1st April 2016 to 1st July 2015. So whereby saying that yes, whoever the SSEs who are wanting to take come under this voluntary disclosure scheme, they can take that benefit and they can disclose that. In Gautam Khaitan case, there was a Section 50, the prosecution was challenged. So by way of an interim order, Delhi High Court basically said that you cannot give a retrospective effect to the Black Money Act, because Black Money Act, if you see Section 3 is the charging section. Section 3 per se talks that the undisclosed foreign income and assets will be taxable from assessment year 1670. But whereas the Act per se comes into effect from 1st July 2015. So in Gautam Khaitan case, Delhi High Court, by way of an interim order, said that you cannot give a retrospective effect to a criminal proceedings. So and in Gautam Khaitan case, they basically had challenged the powers of the government to bring a notification under Section 85 of the Black Money Act, because by that time, Black Money Act per se had not come into even existence. So this was challenged before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has actually not gone into whether it was the legislation per se is retrospective or prospective. On the merits, the matter is pending before Delhi High Court. But so far, the interim order which was granted, where they had stayed the prosecution, on that they had sought to explain the dates. They said, look, this one-time disclosure, voluntary disclosure window which was available to the SSE, but the SSEs could not avail this voluntary disclosure scheme because of the anomaly in the dates. So they noted the dates. They said the Act came in 2000, was enacted, and it was supposed to come into effect from 1st April 2016. But because of the scheme, the dates by which the SSE was supposed to make a declaration and pay taxes, that would have lapsed by the time the Black Money Act came into existence. So they said there is definitely an anomaly, and so if the government has, by way of a notification, brought into effect the effective date when the Act will come into effect, there is nothing wrong. And on merits, they said yes, let the Delhi High Court decide on the retrospectivity. But saying that whether Act is retrospective or not, but definitely it is retroactive, because Act, the charging section says 1st April 2016, bringing in assessment year 1617 into picture, wherein the tax can be done. But retroactive because it's a date which is the Act coming into effect from July 2015 per se. It is retroactive in that sense. But retrospective also, I'll say, because there are certain clues which you can see from the Black Money Act also. one section I wanted to talk first, and then I'll talk about section 2, the recent amendment which was brought in the definition of SSC. One section is 72C, although it is for removal of doubts, but 72C specifically mentions about if the assessing officer, if in the notice of the assessing officer, he finds that there is any undisclosed income, then he can definitely tax those undisclosed assets which comes to the notice. So 72C gives us some inkling, some link that it is retrospective in that extent, because it taxes the undisclosed assets which are prior to 1617. So even an asset acquired in assessment in 1990 can be brought within the purview of Black Money Act. So that's how it is retrospective when you see 72C. There's one more aspect which I'll say. It says about retrospectivity and what is the object, why this section per se was brought in. Section 2.2 defines the SSC and in Black Money Act, and it says it will have the same meaning as Section 6 under the Income Tax Act. Now, the definition of SSC was changed in 2019 with and to bring in the residents, not only residents but non-residents and residents not ordinary residents. And this amendment was brought into effect from assessment year 2015, the date when the Act per se came into effect. So by bringing in this retrospective amendment, the government wants to bring those SSCs also into the tax net who are non-residents or residents who are not ordinary residents. So these are again a retrospective application of the Black Money Act, and this will be subject to challenge before courts. In fact, the challenge to black money proceedings are pending before Calcutta High Court in Sanjay Jhunjhunwala's case, and some other proceedings are also pending. So per se on retrospectivity, and especially when you talk about penal, any legislation which will have a penal consequences and which are going to tax you for penal for an offence which was not there, which you had not committed at the time when the Act per se was in existence, then it have to pass the test of Article 20. So that is again one thing I think retrospectivity would come into picture, and the courts will be inclined and SSCs will be challenging.
Tejasvi, can I come in?
Yes, sir, sure. Yes.
I think I would like to raise a question to Kavita when she said that this notification of 1/7/2015, the Supreme Court has not held that the Act is retrospective. Now, if this notification is upheld by the Supreme Court, and earlier the law said that the Black Money Act applies from the assessment year 1617, and the Act has now become applicable from 1/7/2015 with the notification being upheld by the Supreme Court. And as you said, the amendment in definition of SSC also goes back to 1/7/2015. In a manner of speaking, this gives it retrospective operation even prior to assessment year 1617.
Yes, that's true, sir. But the only saving grace is because if you see the charging section, which is Section 3, Section 3 specifically talks about assessment in 1617. But so far Supreme Court is concerned, Supreme Court was dealing with an issue, the power of the government to issue notification under Section 85, 86. Because as per the SSC, because they had a very limited scope.
No. Kavita, the point is what was held by the Delhi High Court, that a notification could be issued by the government only after the law became operative.
Correct, sir.
So when you have issued a notification from 1/7/2015 when the law was not in vogue, that the Delhi High Court said was not possible. And
Correct.
It says that any amendment or any rules have to be passed through both houses of parliament. But this notification is unilaterally issued by the Central Board of Direct Taxes, and which has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So therefore, that procedure in Section 85 is been given a go by the sanction of the Supreme Court.
But so for correct, you're right, sir. Absolutely right. But so far Supreme Court is concerned, they have categorically said that we are not getting into the issue of retrospective or prospective, because Delhi High Court led Delhi High. We are not touching on the merits. If you really see the last paragraph, they are.
No, merits they have not gone into, but this impliedly
I agree with you there.
Yeah.
That's the reason I'm saying that this Act has a retrospective application. If you look into all these sections together, that this is of course retroactive and retrospective both. That's how Black Money Act per se is under challenge before some courts. Calcutta High Court is one of the courts where this legislation per se for retrospectivity is under challenge.
Thank you, Kavita ma'am, Mr. Ora. Next question to you, Rohit sir. Whether the settlement commission would be eligible to settle the assessments dealing with undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign assets? And if no, how do you think would it impact the taxpayer, and what is the legal position on this?
Yeah, I think this is a very important and an interesting question. And this again takes us back to the interplay between the Income Tax Act and the Black Money Act. Because as we initially mentioned that the option of availing or going to the settlement commission is only when we have a proceedings during the under the Income Tax Act, and there is no such option when the proceedings are pending in the Black Money Act. Now, now in this context, what is important to notice is that again there is no clarity. The department stand has been before the various courts, and in fact the Gujarat High Court is one such case where the settlement commission had already closed the proceedings. The final order was passed, and before passing of the final order, an option and the matter was referred to the income tax department to point out as to whether what is their stand with regard to the pending 153A proceeding, as to whether they want to continue under the 153A proceedings or they want to proceed under the Black Money Act. And before the settlement commission, the department took a stand that yes, you can, the settlement proceedings can continue, and whatever income is finally assessed by the settlement commission, that will be reduced, and subsequently if the proceedings are undertaken under the Black Money Act, an appropriate credit will be allowed. Thereafter, the settlement commission proceeded with the matter, passed the final order, but that final order was challenged by the revenue before the Gujarat High Court. And before the Gujarat High Court, the department took a stand that the insofar as black money and the insofar as foreign assets and foreign income is concerned, they can only be subjected to tax under the provisions of the Black Money Act, and therefore the final order which has been passed by the settlement commission is invalid. And they also took a stand that there is no estoppel against law, and merely because we have taken a stand before the settlement commission that yes, settlement commission can proceed with the matter, still we can contest that the order is without jurisdiction. The Gujarat High Court elaborately dealt with this issue and ultimately come to the conclusion that there is no non-obstante clause. Both the proceedings under both the proceedings there can be an assessment of foreign income and foreign assets. So therefore, it will not be right to say that the only act under which the foreign assets or an income can be taxed is only the Black Money Act, and therefore the jurisdiction of the settlement commission is ousted. And therefore ultimately they dismissed the petition of the department. Of course, there was one more ground on which the department's petition was dismissed, was that at the relevant time the assessees were non-residents, and therefore the provisions of Black Money Act per se were not applicable. But while adjudicating the petition, they also went into the issue of that there is no exclusiveness with regard to the Black Money Act with reference to the undisclosed foreign asset and income. And that matter against the Gujarat High Court, the petition has been, SLP has been filed, and the notice has been issued recently by the Honorable Supreme Court. So, of course, that matter is pending before the Supreme Court. But this actually leads to a lot of issues in the sense that look, to take a practical issue, supposingly in case of a person where the proceedings are started under, say, for example, under 147 or pursuant to a search under section 153A. Now he has a vested right under the Income Tax Act to go before the Settlement Commission. So he doesn't know whether in future the department will start the proceedings under the Black Money Act. And one of the fundamental requirements of going before the Settlement Commission is that you have to make a true and full disclosure. Now look at the taxpayer who goes before the Settlement Commission, makes a true and full disclosure of his foreign undisclosed asset and foreign undisclosed income, and subsequently you tell him that no, this income cannot be assessed under the Income Tax Act, but one will have to resort to the Black Money Act, and therefore you are ousted, and your information itself will be used against you under the Black Money Act to bring you to tax under the Black Money Act. And that's why it is important that the law should be certain with regard to which provisions have to take the front seat with regard to the taxation of this income. And therefore there is no clarity. But of course it is clear that while the proceedings are under the Income Tax Act, one can go before the Settlement Commission and file an application before the Settlement Commission, and the jurisdiction of the commission will be there. But of course, the department is this issue is yet to finally be resolved, and there is no clarity. And I think I'll request Mr. Vora's view also on this, as to with what is his view with regard to this interplay between the settlement commission, the vested right of the assessee, he's making a full and true disclosure, etc. Sir.
I think, Rohit, as you very rightly touched upon, that if the proceedings are initiated under the Black Money Act, that act does not provide a mechanism for the assessee to have his case settled before the Settlement Commission. But I was, debating in my mind that assuming there are proceedings pending in the case of the assessee for assessment years prior to 16-17, and there is a undisclosed foreign bank account. Now, clearly, that can't be subjected to tax under the Black Money Act. And the assessee, therefore, should not be barred from approaching the Settlement Commission to have his case settled, making a full and true disclosure about the monies in that foreign bank account. Now, therefore, I would think that the Gujarat High Court, of course, gave multiple grounds and multiple reasons why the petition of the revenue was thrown out against the order of the Settlement Commission. But I think one will have to keep this in mind, as you said, that under the Income Tax Act, this is a one-time right available to the assessee to approach the Settlement Commission to have his case settled. The assessee, having exercised that right, makes a full and true disclosure that can act as an admission against the assessee if the Settlement Commission is to reject the application and the proceedings are to abate and go back to the assessing officer. So these are, I think, important considerations that need to be kept in mind if the department seeks to oust the jurisdiction of the Settlement Commission to settle cases under the Income Tax Act involving undisclosed foreign income. But an interesting issue that can come out of this is, suppose out of your undisclosed foreign bank account you have acquired a foreign asset. Now, whether with respect to that foreign asset, I would disclose the investment in that foreign asset, but the department would say, no, we would want to tax the value of that foreign asset in a later year, and I will therefore take you under the Black Money Act. So whether in that sense, merely because the undisclosed foreign bank account has been used to acquire an undisclosed foreign asset which you continue to hold, whether in that situation can somebody say that because there is a foreign asset and this is not really undisclosed foreign income, so therefore the Settlement Commission is denuded of jurisdiction to deal with such cases. Of course, these are issues that can arise. But I would think that the law should give primacy to the fact that the Settlement Commission was intended to give a quietus to these kind of matters, to expeditiously settle cases where there was revenue that was locked up. So if you approach it in that light, I would think that the department should really not be contesting the jurisdiction of the Settlement Commission to deal with such kind of cases. And Gaurav, this will also answer your case, the amendment made in the definition of assessee by that by that frame from 1/7/2015. Here, one of the grounds given by the Gujarat High Court was that the assessees were non-resident at that time, not covered under the purview of the Black Money Act. The department argued before the High Court that there is an amendment made in 2019 with effect from 1/7/2015, and the court said no, at the time when they filed the application, there was no such amendment. So I think the waters are muddied. There is no clarity. This again, the Supreme Court will have to settle this aspect of the matter of whether in this kind of situations the Settlement Commission can be said to be bestowed with the power to settle a case and is not stripped of that jurisdiction merely because there is an undisclosed foreign asset or undisclosed foreign income. I would think the assessee's assessment is one that needs to be comprehensively settled by the Settlement Commission when the assessee comes forward and files an application for settlement of his case, exercising that one-time right available during his lifetime.
In fact, otherwise this will be piecemeal. A part of the income will get settled by way of a Settlement Commission order. Part of it you will take in the Black Money Act. There will be so much of complications. I think the certainty is what is required under the law, and that is of course missing.
I recall that the Delhi High Court threw out again the challenge by the revenue to an order of the Settlement Commission, where the Settlement Commission did, in the case of one assessee, deal and settle the case involving a foreign bank account, where the assessee made a complete disclosure of the credits and the debits in that foreign bank account. So there is this case of the Delhi High Court, dealing with this aspect of the matter. But that was prior to the black money law coming in.
And in fact, there is a provision 245I which gives the finality to the settlement commission order. In a way, you are doing away with the finality just by holding that no, we would have continued the proceedings under the so-called Black Money Act in future. That, according to us, cannot be a stand once, at least in a case where the settlement commission passes a final order.
I think, Rohit, as we speak, an important issue that comes to my mind, maybe you need to examine it, whether if the settlement commission settle the matter, does it give immunity also under the Black Money Act? I'm not sure whether that is covered in the scope of that section 245H or
No,
do you
specifically there is no
automatically get
immunity.
immunity under the Black Money Act also?
No,
I
there is no
don't-
specific immunity, but I think they will have to give us a credit if they accept the final settlement commission order, because that the same income cannot
No,
be
no, no,
taxed
I'm
again.
talking about immunity from
But
penalty.
immunity, yes.
I'm
No,
on
those,
that aspect, yeah.
no, there is no specific provision. Tejasvi, I think back to you.
Thank you, Rohit sir and Mr. Vora. Ma'am, Kavita ma'am, one very important question to you, and I think it will also answer the query raised by one of our past participants, Mr. Adarsh Sharma. So, can a foreign asset held by a resident which is not disclosed in the return but income wherefrom has consistently been declared in the return be considered as undisclosed foreign asset under the Black Money Act? And if resident has complete explanation about the foreign asset, and can such resident be penalized under Section 43 of the Black Money Act?
Thanks, Tejasvi. I think the facts which you're mentioning are very similar to the case which was decided by Madras High Court, case of Karti Chidambaram. In the case of Karti Chidambaram, prosecution was issued on the ground that there was no disclosure in the financial act.
Can you please be a bit louder?
Sure. Yes, the facts which you have mentioned are very similar to the case of Karti Chidambaram, which was decided by Madras High Court. In that case, prosecution was challenged on the ground. Prosecution was launched on the ground that there was incomplete disclosure or there was no disclosure in the return of income. So the Madras High Court and Madras High Court have specifically said that if you look at the section 50, section 50 talks about the filing of return under 139(1)(5) also. So what happened after the black money notice was issued to the SSC? SSC actually revised its returns and assets, the financial assets which were supposed to be disclosed. So in that view of the matter, Madras High Court said that since you've already disclosed, and Section 50 specifically talks about 139(5), so no prosecution can proceed, and that's how they quashed the prosecution. I hope this answers your query.
I think there one part I think what the query mentions is the income is offered for tax. What is also important for the taxpayer to find out whether the investment was also disclosed in these tax returns, because unless the income is one part, but the original investment should have also been disclosed. Otherwise, this will become an undisclosed foreign asset.
Yes. In this case, investment was through normal banking channels. In fact, it came through a liberal remittance scheme. And he was able to show. It was just that with a technical breach, he was not able to show in the returns of income, but which was actually revised by filing a return under 139.
Correct. Query, with regard to the
because-
query which has been raised by one.
That's right.
And Rohit, if I may add in, as per the query, if there is the source explanation for the investment,
Okay.
then it may not qualify as undisclosed foreign asset, but he may be subjected to penalty. So the point is, if there is explanation of the source,
43, yes.
it may not qualify as undisclosed asset, but can still be subjected to penalty
Correct.
under Section 43 of 10 lakh rupees only.
10 lakh
Correct.
rupees, correct.
Right. So, Rohit sir, very quick question to you: how feasible it is to expect a non-resident to maintain records of old assets acquired decades ago?
I think this is again is a very practically this is a challenging issue which is coming up. In fact, this is happening more in the case of expatriates and other cases where a person, a non-resident Indian who may be staying abroad for many years, he may have acquired wealth and assets outside India, and then because of his old connections with India, he comes back and settles in India, and asking him to furnish all kind of information with regard to his foreign assets and foreign income, which he may have acquired while he was non-resident, while he may have earned that income outside India. I think that may not be justified. But what we have been seeing practically is the department has been asking for all kinds of information to explain the source of investment of these assets, which may have been acquired say 10 years, 20 years earlier. And practically that kind of information may not be available with any assessee, because if supposingly someone is staying in 2000 in US, and he may not be knowing at that point of time that 10 years or 20 years down the line I will go back and settle myself in India, and I should maintain all those records. So I think that there has to be a practical aspect also which department needs to keep in mind. And in fact, in the context of the one-time settlement scheme, when this issue came up by way of various FAQs, and it was clarified by FAQ number 24 and 32, that if you have earned an income or an asset while you are abroad and you are a non-resident at that point of time, you need not declare all that information in your one-time settlement scheme. But the issue is that of onus, and putting an onus on the assessee to prove to the hilt that no, you first establish the source of that asset. I think that's a challenging issue, which is a practical issue which is coming up. I think Mr. Vora has also seen some of these cases, and we can have his view also on this aspect.
I would think, as Rohit, where you rightly put it, the onus cannot be so burdensome or almost impossible that you find it difficult to discharge. We've seen cases of salaried employees working overseas now come back and settle in India, acquired stock options while they were in service, and the department is asking us to prove the source of the money that you invested in the stock option. I think those options were acquired 15, 20 years back. A salaried employee does not maintain any record. The banks in the United States have told him, look, we don't have records for more than 10 years, we can't possibly help. Now, the department is saying that unless you bring that kind of information, we do not close the proceedings. Here, I think a balance needs to be struck. The department needs to take into account the practical difficulties, the fact that the department has nothing adverse. Again, the assessee, the benefit of doubt should be given to the assessee when the assessee says that I was earning income abroad. And I think you need to look at the surrounding circumstances. I am giving my salary certificate that I was earning substantial amount of income. That income was earned while I was overseas. I have bought, the stock options, which are a minimal part of my overall salary. The principle that you apply in the context of 14A, that if you have own interest-free funds and you have made investments which are much less than the interest-free funds available with the assessee, that principle should equally apply to close these kind of cases. You can't put an impossible onus on the assessee. And I think this is a case of shifting onus. I would say that this principle of shifting onus in the context of 68 should equally apply in with regard to the Black Money Act. So therefore, the point that Rohit made, yes, you can ask a non-resident to prove the sources of income, but up to a point and not beyond. And we've also dealt with some cases where the non-resident was where the Indian resident was stationed and settled in countries where there is no income tax. Now, if there is no income tax, you maintain no accounts. Now, in that situation, asking a person to prove almost the fact that he made the investment 20 years ago out of foreign source income is almost next to impossible. So therefore, I think one needs to take a practical view of this whole thing. And the court, I am sure, will look at the practical aspects, will look at surrounding circumstances. You have, circulars under the wealth tax that if you are possessed of jewelry which is found in search, you look at the status of the family, you look at, the income earning potential, and you leave aside certain amount of the jewelry and you don't seize that jewelry. Those principles should apply even when you are dealing with these kind of matters. Now, Rohit, I think you dealt with returning NRIs. What about expats who are in India and who are resident in India for tax purposes, but are here for, let us say a limited duration? Are they also required to disclose all their foreign assets?
As per the forms which have been prescribed, there is a Schedule FA which is there, and Schedule FA actually requires every assessee who is a resident in the relevant year to give information with regard to his foreign assets. And if we see the Schedule FA, gives all the details. You have to give you details of your movable assets, your immovable assets, if you are a signatory in a bank account, if you are if there is a trust which has been formed, whether you are a trustee, settler, or even a beneficiary of the trustee, you have to give that information. I think there is we were not able to put our hand to any circular or any notification.
But I think it should not apply to a foreign citizen or a foreign national. This is asking them to,
Correct.
maintain records in India when they are here for a limited duration, for an assignment, let's say 3 to 5 years.
There appears to be
I
no
think again
specific
the law needs to
exemption.
take a practical view.
Right. Absolutely correct, sir. Absolutely correct.
Sir, may I supplement in case of expats? We just discussed in the case of Renu Tharani, the test of probability which was used against the assessee. Now, why can't we use that test of probability in favor of the assessee in the sense that when the expat was not in India since last 10 to 15 years, now he's coming back to India, then his wealth has certainly no nexus with its income earned from India. So there
Right.
is no inference, no evidence with the department to suggest that nexus of that income with India. So in that situation, the test of probability should work in favor of the assessee to say that this income is not taxable in India.
I think you have a point. Probably the courts will do, but I don't think I expect the revenue to use this probability test in your favor.
Yeah.
You need to have liberal-minded assessing officers who can accept this proposition.
I think there should be a circular or a notification which should exempt these kind of expatriates who are temporarily stationed in India, and they should not be required to disclose the assets while they were outside India, while they were
And I think
non-residents.
for Gaurav's point, even under FEMA, for instance, you are allowed to retain your foreign assets overseas even after you return. So I think there should be a harmony between the two legislations, that if for FEMA purposes I am maintaining foreign assets outside India because I was working overseas and I opened those accounts or acquired those assets while I was abroad, though that should equally satisfy the tax department.
Right, sir. Gaurav, sir, we have one very interesting question coming up in the chat box. It says, during the income tax proceedings of a salaried individual, the assessing officer observed that some income from a foreign source was not declared. He accordingly taxed the income in the assessment order under Section 143(3) and also initiated penalty proceedings under Section 278. So, could the assessing officer have taxed such income under the Black Money Act? And having taxed such income under the Income Tax Act, can he also impose penalty of rupees 10 lakh under Section 43 of the Black Money Act? Further, can he rectify the assessment order and tax the income from a foreign source under the Black Money Act?
So, Tejasvi, I think answer to this question traces back to our discussion on interplay between Black Money and Income Tax Act. So, what we discussed and observed that since there is an overlap, it is like choosing to apply one act. So, in this case, in the given facts, if the assessing officer revenue has applied Income Tax Act, then that's the final order. Once he has passed, assess that income under the Income Tax Act and impose penalty under that act, there cannot be double taxation. So he has chosen to tax that income under the Income Tax Act. Once he has done that, he cannot now reinitiate proceedings under the Black Money Law. If he initiates, then it could tantamount to be doing a double taxation. So that's one. And similarly, when he has charged penalty under the Income Tax Act, then again there is no locus to charge penalty again under the Black Money Law. Black Money Law in such a situation, in our view, should be ousted. Its application should be ousted at the threshold. So it should get retained under the Income Tax Act. That's one. And two, I think you are also raising the point whether he can rectify the order. So as we have discussed, since there is an overlap, he has taxed that income under the Income Tax Act. So there is no error in the order of the assessing officer. He has done a right act to tax it under the Income Tax Act because that income was also taxable under the Income Tax Act. So there is no question of any rectification. So in that sense, that question will also not arise. So therefore, black money should be ousted if he has opted to tax under the Income Tax Act.
No, I think I will, just with your permission, want to be the devil's advocate here. What have you said that once the assessing officer has opted for assessment under the Income Tax Act, he can't invoke under the Black Money Act. Now, the assessing officer says, I will give you credit for the income assessed under the Income Tax Act under the Black Money Act, which the law provides. So, how do you reach the conclusion that having once opted to make an assessment under the Income Tax Act, that decision is irreversible and the jurisdiction under the Black Money Act is ousted? If what you said earlier was correct, that he can give credit for income assessed there.
But to my mind, there is no provision for giving the credit under the Black Money Law. The provision for credit that contained in Section 512 has a limited application. The credit is available only where the income is assessed prior to assessment years 2016-17.
Okay.
So where, let us say it's a case of AY 17-18,
Okay.
and he
Okay.
has taxed it under the Income Tax Act, then there is no credit mechanism.
Right.
So in the
Okay.
absence of credit mechanism, he would be doubly taxing it. So possibly that should support my answer.
So in your view, then in such kind of a situation, there cannot be simultaneous assessments.
That if he has assessed under one order, at least assessing officer will there will be one order in the hands of assessee.
No,
So
no,
that
what we
order
were
is the
discussing,
assessment.
no, what we were discussing in the context of a search, then there should be the choice with the assessing officer to opt for one of the two statutes to make an assessment under either of them, not both.
So, sir, yes, I would say it's a choice. But point is, once he has made a choice, so if he has initiated under the Income Tax Act and he has closed it, after exercising
No,
that
no, I
choice, he
follow.
cannot
No,
shift the
no,
burden.
no. So I am coming from a different point. I think from what you said, suppose there's a search and you find both undisclosed domestic income as also an undisclosed foreign income, right? Now, in that situation, then he cannot go under the Black Money Act because the domestic income will escape tax. So, therefore, willy-nilly, he will only have to choose to make an assessment under the Income Tax Act. If this is the sequitur of what you are saying, then therefore the assessing officer has to make a conscious choice at that point of time and decide of the particular statute in which he needs to proceed. He will then, let us for instance say there is a search, 153A automatically triggers. He will have to, if he decides to go under the Black Money Act, he will ipso facto have to give up the proceeding under 153A.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think I'll also
I
reconcile
don't
in
think he
that
can
way.
travel in two boats at the same time.
True, true. So he will
I
have to
think
close
that
one
seems to
proceeding.
that seems to be a possible reconciliation.
Yes, yes, sir. So I totally agree with you, and that's what my answer is also.
Thank you.
I'm sure there'll be dissenting voices. If not in this room, otherwise. This is an open question. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So I'll be receiving a lot of questions, but since it's already almost half past one, and we are running against time, I think it's now time to conclude. Mr. Vora, do you have any closing remarks to make?
I would think that the law could have been more carefully legislated and drafted. All these kind of issues that are arising today and which will ultimately find its way to the courts could have been resolved legislatively itself by taking care of such kind of situations. You are now leaving the assessing officer to be the judge, the arbiter, and ultimately the decision maker. So therefore, this I think was not required if one had given it careful thought and consideration before enacting this law. So let's hope that the assessing officers act reasonably, don't act arbitrarily, and do not cause unnecessary harassment and avoidable harassment to the taxpayer.
And just to a supplement, sir, actually law is for human beings, not for superhumans. So the law has been made so draconian that if you are caught with an undisclosed income or an asset, which may not be a deliberate attempt. So for example, in case of expatriates and non-residents who may have slipped to file an income tax return disclosing some income. In that situation, they are actually, this law is a very draconian law for those people like them.
And I think, as you said, people are caught in this whirlpool. There are some people wanting to disclose but not sure whether to come forward and disclose. So, but if you don't disclose, you have this Damocles sword hanging over your heads indefinitely because there is no limitation under which you can proceed under the Black Money Act. So many people are, still sitting on the fence, not knowing what to do.
And in fact, sir, in that context, we have been repeatedly making representations, and we have been telling before various forums that this is actually the right time to come out with an amnesty scheme, if at all the government wants to come.
Right.
Because when they came out with the amnesty scheme or the so-called declaration scheme in 2015, then at that point of time, the law was actually a very new law, and people never realized the effects or the issues which are going to crop up under this law.
Right.
What they can now do is, ultimately the point is the people should come forward and disclose. And if they come out with a disclosure scheme at this point of time, maybe they can put a very high rate of taxation so as to penalize them with regard to the civil consequences.
Right.
But at least give them one more chance to give an immunity from this prosecution and the criminal laws. I think
Right.
that will settle the issues rather than give this draconian law an inhuman kind of a shape. That's my final remarks.
I just wanted to say something. I think everybody has made their closing remark. There's one thing I wanted to talk. In fact, there's a one recent observation of Kerala High Court in the context of Income Tax Act. The judge has observed that how income tax has to be interpreted. The judge said, I'll just quote that. The judge said, Income Tax Act is one enactment that can shatter anybody's linguistic confidence or competence. Each provision inevitably runs into pages, subordinate, and subordinate clauses, piling up in synthetic curriculars with an annual edition. Provisions lose coherence and defy comprehension. Neither lawyer nor a judge can claim with comfort, if not with confidence, that he could comprehend the provision at least on a reading. The taxpayer is surely lost in a maze of rendering phrases. It is therefore time for the revenue to post on the website a plain English version of the enactment, only a suggestion. But so far Black Money Act is concerned, of course, the provisions are very much in black and white. We don't have such clauses, sub-clauses. But I think interpretations are more and more difficult under the Black Money Act. And it's high time that we need judges who have to interpret. They have to interpret should interpret more judiciously, and should see that how this law per se is not written and does not affect this.
Right.
Thank you so much, Tejasvi, for taking all the pain and making this webinar. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So friends, as all good things come to an end, so does our webinar. I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all our panelists for gracing today's webinar and sharing with us your opinion and experience today. I must mention my deep sense of satisfaction for deep sense of appreciation for Mr. Vora for his insightful explanation on the evolving law. Further, we are grateful to Mr. Rohit Jain, Ms. Kavita Jha, and Mr. Gaurav Jain for giving an excellent coverage on the black money law and the threadbare analysis of the Mumbai Tribunal judgment. I thank all the participants for being with us this afternoon. It's been a great pleasure. I hope each one of us is leaving with a better understanding of the law. We'd be delighted to answer any more queries on the subject. You can reach out to us through emails, and we shall definitely try and respond to them. Please let us know your feedback with respect to this webinar. We look forward to them. We hope to come back soon with another webinar on some different and interesting issue. Till then, stay safe and in good health. Thank you.